For the past few weeks, the leftist media have been all in a tizzy about a father from El Salvador being mistakenly deported back to that country. However, there's been some interesting developments with the Supreme Court coming out and siding with this father, saying, hey, Donald Trump, you have to bring him back to this country. However, it's not quite as cut and dry as that, as we're going to hear from Donald Trump and other heads of state. However, what we're also going to see is Kaitlin Collins from CNN being totally taken to task on the questions she is asking about this whole scenario. But before we get to these clips, don't forget to like and comment on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CB.
Thank you, President. Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
So will you return him, President
And you are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. Can you just also respond to that question? Because, you know, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant, because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As two immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan to ask for
Supreme
anything
Court is
to get
asking
him back?
to.
And what was the ruling in the Supreme Court, Steve? Was it 9-0?
Yes, it was a 9-0
In our favor.
in our favor against the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time.
Well,
No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
I asked
¿Usted lo
President
liberaría,
Bukele, what is your,
Presidente
can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm suppose you're not suggesting that I smuggle terrorists into the United States, right?
It's
I mean,
always
how can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or whether you? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, I mean, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
But you can release him inside El Salvador.
Yeah, but I'm not releasing. I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. I mean, we just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into our
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin, except for Venezuela that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President, no, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility. Please go ahead.
Oh my goodness, someone called the police because there was a murder on Capitol Hill. I mean, this is truly insane. For weeks now, the media has been out there saying, oh, this poor father, right? This poor immigrant father. Donald Trump has gotten rid of him mistakenly. He never should have sent back to his country. Only come to find out that, yes, this person is in fact an illegal immigrant. Also, the member of MS-13. And one of the reasons why supposedly the lower court said he couldn't be deported back to El Salvador was because other gangs wanted to kill him in his own country. Okay, but Donald Trump, of course, says, oh, we actually have 2 orders of deportation on this guy, one for being a gang member, one for being in this country illegally, and we're going to honor those. So he ships him back. Then, of course, the Supreme Court steps in and says, you got to facilitate his return because you have this other order. There's a mix-up with the paperwork, blah, 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 blah. Only apparently it's only at El Salvador's discretion. However, lo and behold, who's sitting right there next to Donald Trump? It's Nayib Bukele, all right, El Salvador's president. He says, why in the world would I ship a terrorist back to the United States? It doesn't make any sense. We just turned my country into the safest place in the world, and now you're wanting me to release criminals, release Tamaramis out there? It's not going to happen, okay? And of course, you have Stephen Miller coming out, right? I love this guy. He explains it so well. This person had his due process. He has been ordered for removal. The Supreme Court even agrees that, yes, Donald Trump has the sole discretion and authority in these foreign affairs to deal with this situation, right? But CNN and other places like them, they're out there saying, Donald Trump has lost this one, right? Please bring back in all of the criminal illegal elements. Right? That's exactly what they want because, by the way, it doesn't matter who this person would have been, right? The left is against all deportations, even of the violent criminal offenders, okay? They even wouldn't want Donald Trump to send those people back, and that's been the argument on their side for years. Don't forget, it took 20 million people crossing the border illegally, bankrupting cities, bankrupting states, before Joe Biden even lifted a finger and finally admitted that, yes, he had the presidential power to stop this all along, all right? So all it took was Donald Trump to come in and say, we've had enough. The border is closed. And what do you have? A 92% drop in illegal interactions at the border? This is truly amazing. Yes, indeed, all it took was a new president and not some smarmy, stupid Democrat who's willing to put every single person's life in this country in danger just so they can get some more votes. So Stephen Miller is doing a great job, Pam Bondi's doing a great job, Marco Rubio is doing a great job, and Donald Trump is doing a great job. And Kaitlin Collins over there at CNN, who can say it? All right. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and say hi to your mom for me.